For those of you who watched Flow, let me just say, I too have something in my eye. Yes, the movie does indeed pack quite the emotional punch. What makes this impressive is how little it strains itself to do so. I know that if you're anything like me, you might be wondering just why it hits so hard in this regard. In this video, I think what I want to do is sort of examine why that might be. Flow is more or less a silent film, or at the very least, it functions like one. Its storytelling is purely visual, with sound design being used more for atmosphere than anything else. Its characters, rather than being defined through their dialogue, their stated goals and dreams, or by the descriptions of them by others, are instead defined by the action itself. This is fairly typical though, isn't it? Most films rarely tell through visuals so purely, but all films, if they're at all good, tell their story primarily through images. I would agree, but I still think there's one added element to Flow which does indeed separate it from other films. One important component of characterization in most films relates to time. What I mean by this is that most characters we like and enjoy in movies not only have a past, but also have a desired future. Again, these elements of character are stated, often by the characters themselves, someone who knows them, or someone who's trying to understand them. The goal of a character is rarely so limited to "I want to survive" or "I want to eat." This makes the characters in Flow unique, as their every conflict is the conflict we'd expect for an animal. Don't get eaten, don't go hungry, don't get wet, don't get lost. We have no idea where they're headed, and that's because they don't either. They go where they go based on instinct. These instincts crowd them into the narrative, rather than serve as a supplementary element of it. This is what makes Flow a very meditative experience. Rather than our minds concerning themselves with larger logistical realities, we're always kept within the present. There's something almost new agey in this, but it's often that which is new agey, which is truly the oldest of things. The film has elements of Hinduism and Buddhism in it, the idea of the present being all that there is, or the present, future, and past being all one thing, with only the barriers of illusion, the product of living within a body, which separates them for us. Not only is time and space somewhat illusory in these more mysticism-based belief systems, but another thing that tout as purely illusion is individuality itself. These lives, rather than being individual lives, distinct categories of being based on their species, are instead overlapping types of what it means to be a living being at all. Yes, dogs and cats are very different from one another, but the things they share are unignorable. On top of that, the things we share as humans with them are equally as obvious. Because of this, we can't help seeing ourselves in these characters. They're us, but us abstracted down to our most base instincts and concerns. They're not saving up to buy a house or developing skills to impress an auditorium of their peers. They're only trying to avoid injury and discomfort and to chase whatever momentary pleasure they can find. The strength of this movie is that these momentary pleasures, rather than being tarnished as cheap or inconsequential, are instead expanded using the film's tone and aesthetics to being that of extreme cosmic importance. That's another aspect of mysticism that can be found here. It's noticing the reflections of a higher, perfect beauty within this flawed and corrupted world. It's viewing heaven, but viewing it through a glass darkly. To quote the William Blake poem, Auguries of Innocence, "To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour." The meditative tone of the film contributes to both its beautiful and sublime elements. So then, what to make of the boat which sails through this slice of heaven, and its occasional opposite? In my mind, the boat, which is made up of various species of animal, which, in the metaphor of these characters being us, could symbolize various different forms of personality that make up the world. That boat is a microcosm of how civilization operates more broadly. We coexist and even all play our part on keeping this thing going, while often coming into conflict with one another, going from indispensable to irritating within the blink of an eye. Charity is common, as is regret over that very same charity, but also the whole can't really exist without it, and once one member is lost, their loss is felt deeply. The film could be mistaken as just being spiritual in tone alone, at least at first. That is until the scene of the storm and the bird's ascension into a hole in the sky. Whether what we're seeing here is meant to be taken literal or figurative is hard to say. My interpretation of it is that the bird died in the storm, and what we're seeing is the cat witnessing his soul living on in spite of that. Whether the bird is ascending to heaven or escaping the samsara of life and death in order to be part of the oneness of all things, the purpose of this scene seems to be that it makes the spiritual aspects of the movie undeniable. The loss of one is a loss, but it's also strangely a victory, as there's more to this world and our world in turn than meets the eye. This is important because the theme of mortality comes back again at the end of the film. Throughout the movie, there's the figure of the whale. Not only gigantic, but mysterious, always obscured by the very ocean which keeps our characters afloat. The whale perhaps serves as the representation of the mystery of life itself. It at one point unintentionally saves our protagonist from drowning, but it also terrifies our characters and serves as a genuine threat to them in some instances. It moves around carelessly, almost wiser than the world itself, or at least seeming so to the naked eye. The infinite thematic value of the whale here is reminiscent of how whales are used in Herman Melville's Moby Dick. The whale is not just a factor within this world, it's something of primary importance. But like with its form, that importance is masked in the darkness which reigns beneath the surface of being. When the floodwater is finally drained from this world, leaving our characters to a new golden age of possibility, the whale is stranded, left to die within the very same paradise enjoyed by our characters. Our protagonist coming face to face with this whale, its importance is left for us to meditate on individually. What's very clear though in the nature of the scene is that we're not supposed to take this moment as a tragic one. There's obviously undeniable tragedy baked within it, but somehow, in the cosmology of the film itself, what we're witnessing, the cat meeting this mysterious horror, now with empathy and curiosity, rather than fear and awe, is something fundamental about the nature of our world. Whether it symbolizes us overcoming our fears, us discovering how much we share with even the most alien elements of life, or whether it symbolizes us coming face to face with the real or metaphorical God, everyone who sees the scene has had an overwhelming reaction to it, even if they don't know why. The final moment of the film then complements and expands on this beauty. Our protagonist noticing himself in a puddle, seeing himself in the same water which threatened to drown him not too long ago, is meaningful enough. Seeing his new friends and allies do the same makes this moment more than just a passing curiosity or funny irony. In the end, the characters see themselves, are forced to finally question what it is they truly are. When the screen goes black, that's our call to do the same.